Hello again. I promised in my last video that I would tell you more about what I have learned about stress. So in the next 5 minutes or so, I'm going to give you a little bit of insight into some of the fascinating facts that I discovered at Oxford University and also in my PhD research at UCL, University College London. In order to understand about stress, one of the most important things to recognise is that some of our responses to the world around us are actually pretty primitive and come from our animal ancestors. Most basic animal instincts are designed to be protective to help the species survive. There are many ways to do this, but perhaps the strongest instinct is fight or flight. When an animal faces danger, they can either try to fight their way out of it, or they can simply run away. In order for this to happen, a surge of protective chemicals, including adrenaline, are produced in the body. These chemicals cause a series of bodily changes, such as pumping blood to the muscles, so that the animal is physically prepared to try to fight or to run away. Hence the name, fight or flight. This protective response is absolutely great in the animal world. It was also pretty useful in our caveman days when a saber-toothed tiger was prowling at the mouth of our cave. Indeed, our existence today is testament to the success of this primitive fight or flight response, which ensured our survival. This response is so instinctive, it is essentially a reflex reaction. We do not need to consciously engage this process. It just happens in the blink of an eye, and we can trigger it incredibly easily. However, as we have adapted over time and become more sophisticated as a human race, this protective mechanism is actually becoming less and less useful. In this modern world, there are relatively few circumstances in which we will need to fight for survival or run for our lives. For this, we are obviously very grateful, but it doesn't stop the fact that our bodies are still primed to respond to threats in this way. Some people take advantage of this system. For example, extreme sport enthusiasts will deliberately place themselves in incredibly dangerous and challenging situations in order to get that reward of an adrenaline high. They will happily admit to being adrenaline junkies. This is obviously their choice and absolutely their right to do so. However, very often in modern everyday life, we're actually triggering this protective fight or flight response without wanting to or meaning to, and certainly without choosing to do so. This is because this mechanism is not only triggered by physical threats, it is also triggered by psychological threats. So that means that our mental response to situations, so thoughts and feelings, can trigger spikes of adrenaline and other stress hormones just as easily. Even worse, these psychological threats don't even need to be real. They can just be imagined. So we end up triggering a full fight or flight response just by thinking. Also, as I have explained in an earlier video, this stress response of fight or flight can also be triggered when we start feeling overwhelmed cognitively. So it happens when we're being bombarded with so much information that we're not able to process it because we lack the capacity in our brains to do so. We become overloaded. So fight or flight can be triggered just by having too much to cope with and being in a state of cognitive overload. Occasional spikes in stress hormone production and all the associated biological changes that go with it are actually quite healthy. Our bodies actually thrive on this type of stimulation, and it helps all of our bodily systems function at their best. However, the problem comes when our bodies are responding to real or perceived threats for hours at a time. For example, during a busy day at work, when we're experiencing the pressures and having to cope with so much information from so many different places that our cognitive capacity to deal with everything is really being challenged. Or just the multitasking involved in being a working parent, for example, trying to deal and juggle the demands of work, home and children. All of these situations may mean that the stress pattern is not just spikes, but actually instead a pretty high constant level with stress hormones continually being generated. This can happen day after day after day with very little respite. This is the point at which a completely different physiological response is triggered, which is meant to be protective, but actually slowly and steadily creates a negative impact on our health with many physical and mental health problems. To find out about what happens, look out for my next video on my Facebook page and YouTube channel, where I will explain some more about the problems caused by our caveman physiology when we're trying to live and cope in this modern crazy world. Bye for now.